Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into something totally fascinating and honestly, completely counterintuitive when it comes to dealing with modern anxiety. We're unpacking a really provocative text called Resolving the Contradictions Between Reality and the Ideal, and this comes directly from the teachings and writings of Life Yuan founder, the guide Xu. Now, if you've ever felt just crushed by the weight of modern expectations or, exhausted by that constant friction between where you currently are and where you desperately want to be, well, this explainer is absolutely going to challenge how you view ambition itself. So let's jump right into it. To really wrap our heads around Zhu Feng's teachings, we've got to start with this foundational quote from the ancient Tao Te Ching. It says, "The reason why I have great trouble is that I have a body. If I had no body, what trouble could I have?" Right? The philosophy here is pretty stark. It's saying that simply because we have a physical form, we're stuck carrying all this heavy baggage of survival. We're worrying about food, clothing, housing, getting sick, facing humiliation, or just dealing with fear. The core idea is that our very attachments, our very presence in the world, is literally what creates our troubles. Now, what's truly fascinating is how the guide Xu Feng takes that ancient philosophical concept and applies it straight to our modern psychological struggles. He asks a very direct question. How do we resolve those painful contradictions between our everyday reality and our grand ideals? And his answer? It's incredibly radical. He basically says the absolute best way to resolve the friction between your reality and your ideals is, well, just to completely abandon having any ideals at all. Yep, because think about it, if you have no ideal, that contradiction just vanishes entirely. In his writings, Xu Feng points out this really interesting pattern. He calls it superiority through absence. For example, what's the most wonderful sword fighting rule? Using no sword. The most superior mental rule? Having no intention. The best kind of management? Having no management. And so, following that exact same logic, he argues that the absolute highest ideal a person could possibly hold is to have no ideal whatsoever. I know, it's a complete 180 from how we're normally taught to structure our lives. But let's look at the numbers for a second, because he actually anchors this whole philosophy in a pretty stark statistical claim. Xu Feng argues that when you set out an ideal, the probability of you actually achieving it is incredibly bleak. He estimates that less than 5% of ideals are ever truly realized. Think about that. That leaves a massive 95% failure rate. So setting an ideal in his view is statistically just an exercise in futility. And because of that overwhelming failure rate, the text makes a striking mathematical equivalence. It says that an ideal is literally equal to a fantasy. It's equal to imagination. It's equal to pure delusion. According to him, harboring some grand ambition isn't actually a virtue at all. It's just a form of self-deception that ends up pulling you further and further away from the actual truth of reality. To back up the idea that ideals are actively harmful, the source actually points to history. The text neutrally observes the fates of specific historical figures from the Mao Zedong era. We're talking about leaders like Liu Shaoqi, Lin Biao, and Peng Dehuo. Xu Feng's analysis here is that these men didn't meet a good end specifically because they were just too idealistic. His argument is that if they had simply let go of those massive ambitions and just followed the flow of leadership, respecting Mao Zedong as the leader without pushing their own grand ideals, they would have survived smoothly. Instead, their ambition was exactly what led to their downfall. And he claims this pattern of overly ambitious figures falling hard repeats endlessly throughout history. All right, moving on to section 1, the cost of ambition and the parable of the college graduate. So, moving from the historical side to the deeply personal, how does this all play out in our modern hustle culture? Well, the text gives us a story. A college graduate gets a decent salary and forms one singular ideal: buy a 3 million yuan house right in the city center. To get it, he completely drains his parents' lifetime savings and takes on a massive 2.1 million yuan loan. Then, to pay off that crushing debt, he quits his stable job, opens up a shady workshop, and starts blending chemicals to make fake Wuling Yi wine, completely compromising his conscience in the process. Fast forward a few years, he tries to go straight, gets a corporate job, but then the market crashes. The house's value plummets to just 1 million yuan, he gets fired under false accusations, and is forced to sell. In the end, he has no house, his parents' savings are totally destroyed, and he's still 400,000 yuan in debt. This tragic little mini-narrative is Xu Feng's ultimate proof. This is the kind of massive destruction that an ideal can cause. And the scope of this problem is absolutely massive. Feng boldly estimates that if you were to walk into a prison right now and run the numbers, a full 50% of the inmates landed behind bars precisely because they were driven and ultimately tormented by their own extravagant ideals. The pursuit of some unattainable ideal is what pushes people into debt, into corruption, and eventually right into crime. The source also takes this logic of removing the root cause and applies it to other major societal issues. Take domestic violence, for instance. The text argues that legislation and global interventions have basically failed to stop it. Why? Well, because the violence is fundamentally rooted in the existence of the family unit itself. So Xu Feng proposes a highly unconventional solution here. He says the only effective way to insulate people from domestic violence is to stop getting married and just stop forming families altogether. No family, no domestic violence. It perfectly mirrors his logic on ideals. If you remove the structure, you remove the suffering. Okay, but if we strip away all our grand plans and structures, what on earth is left? That brings us to Section 2, the accidental success, or living without planning. Here, Xu Feng pivots to his own lived experience to offer us an alternative. Just look at the sheer variety of his past ventures. He operated a club, a bar, a fast food joint, and 4 different shops in Zimbabwe. He rented out a dance hall, a restaurant, and a hair salon. And today, he runs a small hotel in British Columbia, Canada, serving guests from all over the world. But here is the absolute most important takeaway from all of this. He explicitly notes that absolutely none of this was ever planned, not one bit. Every single one of these ventures came to him purely by accident. They were never, ever part of some grand ideal, which leads right into his ultimate piece of advice for future generations. Do not have ideals. He writes that as long as you have no ideals, you're not going to face those awful contradictions. And without that painful friction weighing you down every day, you are finally free to live what he beautifully describes as a leisurely fairy life. But come on, this obviously begs a massive, super practical question for all of us. If we aren't supposed to have any ideals, what are we actually supposed to do when we wake up every morning? Let's look at Section 3, the path of no ideals, and how to live day to day. According to Xu Feng, living a life without ideals doesn't mean you just sit around doing nothing. It's actually about establishing roots. The text gives us this clear 4-step framework. Step 1, cultivate your morality, perfect your inner soul garden, and just constantly keep learning. Step 2, comply with nature, be totally content with being ordinary, and stop competing with everyone else. Step 3, just do your daily work, do it well, and accumulate blessings while making sure to consume fewer of them. And finally, Step 4, stay away from illegal or corrupt risks, and simply leave the actual management and arrangement of your life entirely up to the Tao. We're going to wrap up our explainer today with this really powerful metaphor from the source text. It says, dripping water onto stones will wear them down, so pursuers of Tao should exert their efforts consistently. Just like how water naturally forms channels over time, or how melons naturally drop the second they're ripe, attaining peace happens naturally when the time is ready, not by forcing some grand, stressful ideal into existence. It really leaves us with a profound question to ponder. In a world that is completely obsessed with goals and hustle culture, could totally dropping your deepest ambitions actually be the true secret to finding lasting peace? Thanks so much for joining me to explore this fascinating philosophy today. Keep learning, and I'll see you in the next one.